everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're tackling Canada's post graduation work permit. The PGWP. It's like the golden ticket for international grads wanting to work in Canada. But let me tell you, the rules, they've been changing faster than a probe. Well, you get the idea.
It's true. It's a bit of a moving target, this PGWP. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, bam! New updates, new guidelines, online studies, application deadlines, you name it, they've probably tweaked it.
And that's exactly why we're here. We've got our hands on the most up to date info straight from the Canadian government's website as of October 2024. So think of this deep dive as your ultimate cheat sheet. Now, you might assume that studying in Canada automatically means you're eligible for a PGWP, but
And that's where a lot of people get tripped up. It's not quite as simple as that. Your program needs to tick a few boxes before you can even think about applying.
so let's break it down. First things first, one of the biggies seems to be whether you studied at a public or private institution. That seems to make a difference.
Absolutely, it's a key factor. Public institutions are usually more straightforward when it comes to PGWP eligibility. We're talking about your colleges, universities, those kinds of places. If your program's at least 8 months long and leads to a degree, diploma, or certificate, you're usually in good shape.
8 months, got it. Shorter programs, maybe double check. Now, private institutions, those seem a bit trickier. What's the deal there?
They can be, yeah. It's not impossible to get a PGWP if you go the private institution route. But there are more hoops to jump through. The institution needs to be authorized by their province to grant degrees. And not just any degree. It has to be one that the province actually recognizes.
So we're talking a proper degree, like an associate's, bachelor's, master's, or even a doctorate, not just a certificate program from any old place.
Exactly. And of course, this is Canada we're talking about, so we can't forget about Quebec. They like to add their own little twist to things, as always.
Ah, Quebec, always keeping things interesting. What do they have up their sleeve this time?
Well, instead of just the 8-month rule, sometimes they go by a 900-hour minimum, particularly for vocational and technical programs offered by public or private institutions.
Hold on, 900 hours. That's a whole lot of studying.
It is. So if you're considering a vocational program in Quebec, always double check. Is it 8 months or 900 hours? Don't assume it's the same as the rest of Canada.
Good advice. And speaking of checking those fine details, I've heard things about flight schools in Quebec. They have their own rules too.
You're on top of it. They do. They can be PGWP eligible, but it might be the 8-month rule, the 900-hour requirement, or even both. Depends on the specific diploma you're going for.
Talk about confusing. So, aspiring pilots studying in Quebec triple check those program requirements.
Absolutely. And this actually brings up a really important point for everyone. Always, always, always refer to the official Government of Canada website for the most up-to-date information. We're using the October 2024 guidelines, but things change all the time.
Can't stress that enough. Don't rely on outdated info. We want you to be prepared. Okay, let's say you've got your heart set on a PGWP. What about transferring schools or taking a break from studying? Can those throw a wrench in things?
They definitely can. If you've transferred from one designated learning institution, a DLI, to another, you can actually combine the time you studied at both to meet that 8-month minimum.
So it's about the total time, regardless of how many schools you attended.
Exactly. But, and this is important, if you transfer from a non-DLI to a DLI, only the time at the DLI counts.
Oh, interesting. So even if you started in Canada for a year, but that first semester was at a non-DLI, it wouldn't count toward the PGWP. That's good to know.
Exactly. It highlights how crucial it is to really plan your education with the PGWP in mind. Now, study breaks, those can be a little trickier.
Yeah, because life happens, right? Sometimes you need a breather.
Absolutely. Unauthorized breaks in your studies are generally a no-no. They can really hurt your chances of getting that PGWP.
By unauthorized, you mean just taking off without letting your school know or getting any kind of approval.
Exactly. Disappearing without a trace is not a good look.
Yeah.
But there are valid reasons for taking a leave of absence, of course.
Mm.
Medical reasons, for example. Or if your DLI approves a break for personal reasons.
So if you're planning a break, documentation is key. Get everything in writing.
Absolutely. You need to prove to immigration officials that your absence was legit, that it didn't violate your study permit.
Got it. So we've covered public versus private institutions, Quebec's unique rules, transferring schools, study breaks. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. But we're just getting started. Now buckle up because it's about to get really interesting as we delve into the world of distance learning and how it affects your PGWP eligibility.
The online study roller coaster. I've heard about all the twists and turns on that one. Let's dive in.
You know how everything went online when the pandemic hit? Well, the PGWP rules have been playing catch up ever since.
Oh, tell me about it. It's been tough keeping track of all the changes. Imagine starting your program online thinking everything's good, then bam, the rules change, and you're left wondering if all that online study even counts.
We've heard that from so many people, so let's break it down. How do these changes affect you? Let's start by going back in time. Remember the good old days,
Hop in the time machine. Where are we headed?
back to September 2022. Or should I say before September 2022? If you were in a PGWP eligible program back then, studying online from, say, your home country, you could still get the work permit.
Ah, the days of ultimate flexibility. Then September 2022 happened, things started to shift.
That's when the 50% rule came in. You had to complete at least half your program within Canada.
So online or in person didn't matter as much as long as you were physically present in Canada.
Exactly. Big change from the old rules. But hold on, because the really big shift happened more recently, September 2024.
Oh boy. Fast forward to now. What's the latest? What do people need to know?
That 50% minimum. Now it has to be IN class studies in Canada.
So no more logging in from your couch in Canada.
You got it. Those in-person classes are non-negotiable now if you started your program after September 2024.
Makes sense in a way. They want grads who've really experienced the Canadian education system, right? Connections, all that.
Precisely. Real-world integration. Okay, remember those public-private partnerships we talked about earlier?
The ones where a private college delivers a program for a public one?
Yep, those can be a bit of a gray area. How do these online study rules apply to those programs?
That's a good question. Seems like it could get complicated fast.
It does. The timeline matters here. If you started before May 15, 2024, you might still be eligible, even though these programs usually aren't.
So there's a bit of a loophole for those who started early. Important detail for anyone in that boat. What about starting on or after May 15th?
Then no dice. Those public-private partnerships starting on or after that date, even with some in-person parts, they're not PGWP eligible.
Okay, so the clock is ticking if that's something you're thinking about. Oh, but you mentioned different provinces earlier.
You're good with the details, yes. One more layer. Started before January 31st, 2023 in one of these programs, but the private and public colleges are in different provinces. You might be eligible.
Okay, this is where I need to take notes. So many dates to keep track of.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Talking to an immigration expert can be really helpful if you're not sure.
Absolutely. Better safe than sorry when it comes to this stuff. Okay, so we've tackled the online study craziness.
Yeah.
What's next on our Canadian adventure?
Let's talk about graduating. You've got your program done. Time to apply for that PGWP. The process itself is fairly straightforward, but there are some must-knows to avoid any hiccups.
Okay, sounds good. Let's talk application process. What do people absolutely need to know? All right, so let's say you've checked all the boxes, you've got your ducks in a row, you're ready to apply. What now?
First things first, don't drag your feet.
Yeah, time is precious.
You've got 180 days after you graduate to submit that application. 6 months might sound like a lot,
It does,
but that time can fly by.
especially with everything else going on after graduation. Celebrations, saying goodbye, maybe even a little traveling.
Exactly. And on top of that, your study permit has to be valid when you apply. That's non-negotiable.
So no last-minute scrambles with an expired permit. Okay, but what if your study permit's about to expire, but you haven't gotten your final grades yet?
Tricky, but there are options. You could look into a visitor visa to extend your stay legally, or even apply for the PGWP from outside Canada.
So bridge the gap, either with a visitor visa or by applying from home. What if, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, what if someone lets their study permit expire while they're still in Canada and then tries to apply?
Not ideal. Definitely not recommended.
But hypothetically.
Hypothetically, you'd have 90 days after that permit expires to apply, not just for the PGWP, but also to restore your status as a student.
Talk about adding stress. It's a
Yeah.
whole other process. Right?
Exactly. Way easier to just stay on top of those deadlines.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, remember how you used to be able to just rock up at the airport and apply for a PGWP?
Oh, yeah, like right there in the customs line.
Yeah, those days are gone. As of June 24th, 2024, it's all online or by mail.
No more spontaneous applications.
Nope. Plan ahead. Get your documents together.
Makes sense. Any other documents people should be thinking about, even if they're not mandatory up front, just to be proactive?
Great point. Things like medical exams, if you think you might end up in a field where that's required, like healthcare.
You can get a head start.
Exactly. Get it out of the way early.
Smart. Okay, passports. What happens if someone's passport expires before their PGWP would?
Ideally, your passport should cover your whole intended stay in Canada. But if it does expire early, Your PGWP will only be valid for as long as your passport is.
Ah, so your work permit gets cut short. Not the end of the world, though.
Exactly. And you might be able to extend it later once you've renewed your passport. Just follow the instructions from immigration.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the PGWP itself, but what about life after the PGWP?
Yeah, because for many, it's just the first step, right? Exactly. It's often a stepping stone to permanent residency.
Mm.
And it makes sense. You get that Canadian work experience, which is gold for so many immigration programs.
Speaking of which, are there any specific programs that PGWP holders are particularly well suited for?
Absolutely.
Right.
One is the Canadian Experience Class, or CEC. It's all about, you guessed it, your Canadian work experience.
Makes sense. What else?
The Provincial Nominee Program, the PNP, provinces and territories get to choose skilled workers who meet their needs.
So each province has its own little system, like a mini immigration program.
Exactly. They all have their own criteria, some target specific jobs, so it's worth doing your research.
Okay, cool. What about the big one? The Federal Skilled Worker Program.
FSW, that one's points based. Work experience, education, language skills, age, all that gets factored in.
So your PGWP work experience helps you rack up points. But it's not just about work, right? You mentioned language skills earlier.
Right. Your COB level, that's your Canadian language benchmark score. That's super important.
Got it. So it's about proving you can thrive in a Canadian workplace. Okay, last question. Does your actual job title matter?
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
Every job in Canada has a NOC code, a National Occupational Classification code. Some programs target certain NOC codes.
So the type of work you do on your PGWP could impact your immigration options later on.
Exactly. It's something to keep in mind.
Okay, wow, we've covered a ton today. From eligibility to applications to life after the PGWP.
It's been quite the deep dive.
It really has. Just to recap those key changes one more time, those online study rules, big changes there, especially for programs starting after September 2024. 50% in class in Canada.
No more online-only PGWP dreams.
Exactly. Then there's the 180-day rule for applying. Don't miss that deadline. And remember, your study permit needs to be valid when you apply.
No procrastinating.
And lastly, those airport applications. Gone. History.
All online or by mail now.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the PGWP. Hopefully you feel empowered, informed, and ready to tackle those Canadian immigration dreams.
Absolutely. Remember, the official Government of Canada website is your best friend throughout this process. And as always, we'll have some helpful links in the show notes.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you all. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and good luck on your Canadian journey.